Good evening, how are you? Well, it's not bad right now, but it has been raining. Just 1 second before I turned this camera on my phone so I could talk to you, I heard thunder. When I was a kid, I had a lot of trouble saying the word thunder. I'd say thunder. My dad and mom would sit with me in the kitchen until I got it right. And then I'd fall back to thunder again for some reason. I don't know why. How we say words and what they mean is important. And I thought it would be useful to focus on an element of the campaign, because I'm having the withering feeling that the longer the campaign goes on, the vaguer the conceptions we discuss. And I understand that that's especially true as you're about to go into a convention in which almost everything is agreed upon by the delegates, the candidate, the staffs, and all those people have opinions, including myself. But one of them that may persist, and it's an interesting one, it's kind of the canary in the cave kind of stuff, is price gouging. One of the things that Kamala Harris, our presidential candidate, has said is that she is going to look into price gouging because it is artificially increasing the cost to consumers at the market. And so it's not about inflation, and it's not about something the government can control, but she's going to change that. Now, one of the reactions was, are they talking about price controls? Now, it's very interesting that the people who would get in this debate would then choose a term that perhaps the public doesn't know. I really got that dog upset. And so then they use a word, instead of price gouging, a word like price controls, which was to control the inflation during a war. And Richard Nixon actually worked on that himself. And his philosophy at other times was probably different. But at that time, it was not. This guy seems to be following me. So, and I'm displeasing him because he's barking. So, in other words, there is resistance to the idea of stopping price gouging. And what we should see is the plutocrat's hand, the puppeteer above the common view, who is causing this dispute because they don't want us to touch their profits. Run that dog down for me. So another attractive and quiet dog passed, which I suppose explains it. It's not about me. And we all have difficulty with that. Okay, so let's go back to the price gouging question. Once again, do you think industry wants the government saying, hey, stop taking excessive profits, particularly when we don't have inflation? And who's going to speak on their behalf? Well, it's not Citizens United, it's Plutocrats United. So they've contributed to people, in my opinion, who are saying, oh, no, we don't want price gouging. Oh, my God, price gouging. This is not a liberal idea. It goes back for some time about how trusts fix prices based on what the traffic can bear. And so we had trust busting people like Teddy Roosevelt, Bill Douglas, who went on the Supreme Court, but before that had a lot to say about these things. I had a professor who was very kind to me. I got to work with him a great deal, Harvey Goldschmidt, and he's passed on, and it's very sad because he had so much more to say, but in his lifetime he did a lot about fighting those who got excess profits by combining in such a way to the detriment of small businessmen. Now, let's go back to what could possibly matter in terms of price gouging, and what are the consumers feeling that convince them it's inflation. Well, those who buy eggs and milk and other staples see the prices going up. And so they take that is inflation. Now, side note here, those of you who are vegans aren't concerned about eggs and milk probably, not as much anyhow. But to many consumers, those things are important, and in terms of price, and not exclusive those things. But the prices, for example, went up 11% in 2022 and 5% in 2023. So how are they going up? Well, there's a lot of talk in the industry about how they have price power, how they can control it. So there are going to be studies of mergers like Kroger and Albertson to see what that's about. And one of the things that we're concerned that it's about is that the prices were elevated supposedly because of conditions between COVID and real inflation, and they left them higher. And leaving them higher, Biden called out to the industry last year saying that you got to stop this price gouging. And his successor, at least as a presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, has now said the same thing and said we're going to fight that. One of the first things she said. And people say, how can you do that? Well, being a lawyer, let's talk about one of the obvious ones. The Robinson-Patman Act provides that you can't make a difference between retailers. So if small grocers are not getting the prices the large grocers are getting, then those terms are going to have to be changed. And there's a statute that would make that true. But, you know, consider what Trump wants to do and what has happened before. He wants to increase a tariff. Well, if you increase a tariff, consumers will pay more. Now, I heard one of these so-called experts about financial matters and our economic policy and our international policy say, yeah, but it's a one-time affair. No, it's not a one-time affair. If you're cutting off a stream of goods that's coming into the country by making the tariffs high, and they pass on that cost to consumers here, or they don't transport at all, then you've increased demand, supply is the same, and the prices will go up here. All those economic lectures are nothing compared to actually living through these kinds of things in real time. So, by the same token, whether or not you're talking about tariffs, if you're limiting supplies, then you also increase demand. And the industry has been accused of doing just that. So we don't have enough hard answers about these things, but the companies have bragged that they have pricing power, and they're not going to want to give it up. Now, some say we're a capitalistic society in the terms that Adam Smith said in 1776, but it ain't so. That's not the way it is. Because what happens is the government, on behalf of a collection of very wealthy people, passes policies that advantage one industry or one company and others over others. So we don't have a perfect situation. And when you talk about price controls, what is a better way to control businesses that just want a high profit? Is it to let them alone and trust them to do it right? Or is it to threaten them with Robinson-Patman? Or to talk about how you do imports differently? Or any of the other things that you can do? Also, the industry wants to resist labor from organizing. And they want to organize because they want a share of the growth of income to the companies for which they work. Now, they're not saying that they are against price gouging, but they are saying that they want to be paid and rewarded for their productivity that they're not being paid for. So a lot of companies are resisting labor. This is the formulation that we have to be aware of in this year of a presidential election. And it strikes me that it's more visible, the inequity, as stated in this election, than normally. And I have the feeling that both sides rather slide over the specifics in a way that I have poorly summarized it, but at least I've said it. And they're not saying it. Oh, it's a bad idea. It could all these other things could happen. Yeah, well, right. All these other things could happen. And you try to make them, all those things could happen to the poor person going into the grocery store and buying eggs. But that's not how it happens. What they're really talking about is preserving and protecting their profit. Now, on Monday, the Democratic Convention begins in Chicago. And it's many years ago, in '68, when we had perhaps the worst convention in American history, given the circumstances of multiple assassinations and a president resigning and somebody picking up and a police riot in the streets, all of that. But we're back in Chicago, and I don't think anything of the sort's going to happen. In my own lifetime, I have been to, I don't know how many, but a lot of the Democratic conventions. The first one I went to in 1980 matched Carter versus Ted Kennedy. And I had been a supporter of Ted Kennedy and got to sit with his family the night he gave the Dream Will Never Die speech. And I worked with Arthur Schlesinger on the campaign in New York and others. And I was finally old enough as an adult to be involved in a real campaign. And there have been other campaigns since. And in 2008, I was supporting and working as a delegate for Hillary Clinton, having been First Lady and a U.S. Senator with some accomplishment. After a young demonstrated interest in issues political and important to the country when she worked on the impeachment of President Nixon. And this guy, Barack Obama, he was running that year. So those are two of a number of conventions I went to. And those two represent the kind of work that needs to be done to knit the party together. In 2008, to single out one, it was a convention in which people came to the convention with some differences. But we managed to work those differences through. And while I was a Hillary delegate in the Virginia delegation, I found myself meeting with others, explaining to them how we should support what Hillary wanted to have happen, which is to make an agreement to make this a cooperative convention between the forces of Obama and the forces of Hillary Clinton. And they did that. And in my lifetime, I haven't seen as constructive an engagement as that convention. This one is going to have different challenges. The challenges of this convention are to state, perhaps more precisely, the emphasis on those matters, those themes that will matter to the people. And I'm kind of a guy who believes in threes, and I've said this before. There's something about the way we think. There's 1 and 2 and 3. We can do that. And of those three, one will be about women, one will be about race, and the third one might very well be about the sacrifice we seek to avoid, which is the loss of a democracy and a republic. Now, in what order would you put those? I frankly think the most important, objectively, of the three is what Trump would do to our government, basically destroy it, end it as a democracy, and have no voting in the next presidential election because of his dictatorship as planned on the very first day he would take office should he win the election. So that's kind of my thinking on it, but you can't ignore themes that strike with the people, because it is misleading to say the decisions in this political campaign, certainly, are going to be entirely logical. They're going to be as a result of disciplined thought. And that's less likely because we're going to see the kind of, dirty slime thrown back and forth, which will interfere with the message of who can do what and who's been the most thoughtful and who will actually do it. And so that's the challenge this year. There's no question right now the Democrats have it all over the Republicans, because the Republicans don't have a plan except they cheated, they lied, they're no good, they're stupid, they're this, they're that, elect me. Well, if the people buy that, more than the government is over. Civilization melts away. Because the government, based on fear and hate and domination, and that does not treasure freedom, can only end in tragedy. And it may not be the ballot box if they win, but it will certainly follow after that. I've joked to some people, we may find ourselves in camps, in cots near each other, because we actually have thought. People thinking are dangerous to dictatorships. And maybe the only question is, in the pecking order, how visible were you? So I don't contemplate this too seriously, because I believe that the sunshine that glows through the developments in the last several weeks will increase, that our momentum, that our mass is growing, and the volume of our expansion into other territories is increasing. And the polling right now, not definitive, but it's turned around, and it has Kamala and Tim making inroads. And if this convention that is just around the corner after midnight tonight is any indication from past conventions, we should get a bump. That might move us into a zone in which, as Tim said, you can sleep when you're dead. Work the last number of days, the last decades of days that we have to get through to win this election. And I think that we can do it. We are going to walk through walls of fire created by the crazies, but we have truth on our side. We have energy on our side. We're ready to fight, and when we fight, we win. Thanks, Kamala. So, tomorrow, I have to go for a doctor's test myself. When Holly was in the hospital, I got blood in my eye, and it obstructed and blurred my vision. And I kept it from her because I didn't want her thinking about that. And I tried to do nothing about it while she was in the hospital. It wasn't evident to her that I had this. But it seemed to get worse. And soon after she left the hospital, we went up and they did an operation on my eye, which was amazing because this woman, who was a genius, the doctor I had, she taped my head to the table, and I could hear everything. I was awake during the whole thing. So this is just that kind of checkup, but it's a drive to do it. So I hope to talk to you guys tomorrow, and it'd be nice to talk about the convention and the 2 or 3 conventions I mentioned. Give you some idea how important the convention can be to the outcome of the election. But I have a feeling that this convention is going to be a great event to see who the Democrats are as compared to Hulk Hogan being on the stage at the Republican convention. So, probably until tomorrow, I say good evening to you from my cathedral of trees nearby. All the best. Bye-bye.